Dear learners, I am Christina Georgy, your academic counselor, and I welcome each and every one of you to my session. So dear learners, let me remind you that this is a specialized session based on the course code BEGE144. If you are a student of BEG, you might be studying this particular content under the course title BEGC134. So this particular lecture will be useful for both students of BEGE144 and BEGC134 respectively. I suppose I made it clear to you. As per the request of many of our learners, this particular session will be recorded by me. So shall we proceed? Thank you. You can ask me if there is anything you are not sure about so that I can explain. Alright. So the work that we will be looking at today is titled Things Fall Apart. So when you look at Things Fall Apart, it is one of the most widely renowned novels by Chinua Achebe. Remember, he has tried to make this as part of a trilogy. What do you mean by a trilogy? A trilogy is basically a set of novels, basically a sequence of knowledge, which are 3 in number. So the other 2 novels as part of this trilogy are namely Arrow of God and No Longer at Ease. Remember, the first novel is Things Fall Apart. Second one is Arrow of God and the third one is No Longer at Ease. So remember, we will be focusing our attention towards the very first novel, that is Things Fall Apart. Always remember to study the proper title, Things Fall Apart. Alright, so first and foremost, let's have a look at the author of this particular novel, that is Chinua Achebe. So if you look at your study material also, you can have a detailed understanding of the life and works of Chinua Achebe. So I will summarize the basic points for you. Firstly, as you know, as I mentioned, he is a well-renowned novelist from Nigeria. But we can say not only about Nigeria, but from the entire continent of Africa. He is the best known novelist, not just in Nigeria, but from the entire continent of Africa. He is the first African writer whose books have been prescribed as part of the curriculum in Africa. And now see, it's not just in Africa, even in our own motherland we are studying about his work, right? Yes. So we can say that he was the first black novelist from Africa who has got a global recognition and readership. He is not only the most widely translated novelists in the world, but also one of the most universally respected novelists for that matter. Remember, his works have been translated into more than 40 languages. Alright, remember, you can use all these for your TE also. They will certainly ask you a question from Things Fall Apart, the novel. So when they ask you this question for your TE, you can certainly make use of all these points that we are learning at the moment. So shall we have a look at the life and work of Chinua Achebe in detail? I would be happy to have your responses as and when required. We all must have heard of the river Niger, right? At some point in life we must have heard about this river. So he was born somewhere near the banks of this river Niger in the year 1930. So to be very specific, he was born in Ojidi near Onitsha on the banks of the river Niger. I am also not very sure regarding the pronunciation. Nevertheless, let's assume this is the pronunciation. So his father was a missionary, that is one of the earliest Igbos to take to that profession. Remember, Igbos refers to this particular tribe's name. We will look at this in detail while we move on to this novel and the society in detail. So about his education, a very quick mention. After his school education at a government secondary school, he moved on to the University College of Ibadan to take a graduation, and it is there that he came in close contact with the European culture and particularly the European literary traditions, and gradually his interest in the history of Nigeria, his own land, also developed, and as a consequence what happened? He started filling the gaps in his readings by asking questions about the pre-colonial society. He began to think more on the various aspects regarding the pre-colonial society of Africa, and this in a way inspired him to write on various stories regarding the tribes, their situations, the scenario of those times, and he wanted to prove more or less that they too had a strong culture and a strongly rooted history. Alright. So we can say that he began to write at a later part of the 50s, that is, it is only during his 50s that he started writing. And he was very conscious that he was writing about a part of the world with which his foreign readers, that is readers in Europe and America, would not be familiar. That is, he was about to write about the land which was quite considered as if a dark continent. So he was very conscious of the fact that he was writing about a part of the world which was quite unknown to the mainstream readers, that is the foreign readers in Europe and Africa. So we can say that he finds himself in a unique situation as an interpreter of a society whose traditions have been disrupted by the intervention of colonialism. Once colonialism came in, once the Britishers invaded, the innate traditions and all customs of these society of ours, such an intervention happened and these traditions got tampered to a greater extent. So his novels, that is Achebe's novels, reflect on the changes which have come about in the society. What is the name of the society? Igbo society, IBO, Igbo society, and the Nigerian life in general as a result of what he calls a chance encounter between Europe and Africa during the colonial period. So this particular work also mentions this aspect, that is the interventions of the white men and how it affects the traditions and cultural practices of the Igbo society. All such aspects we will see in this particular novel also. So Achebe's novels are unique and quite different from those written by his counterparts in the other parts of the world, especially in England. But we can say that he was influenced by a few of them, including Joseph Conrad, Graham Greene, Evelyn Waugh, etc. And these people, these authors must have influenced his development as a writer. Remember, he was also honored with a lot of awards, medals, degrees, fellowships, and also editorship of a series of publications. Okay, so Things Fall Apart, published in the year 1958, is the first of the three novels. I mentioned that the other two are namely No Longer at Ease, published in the year 1960, and Arrow of God, published in the year 1964. Achebe was more or less a child of colonialism, and he began to write when Nigeria was almost free. Even though his writings reflect some of the pre-colonial aspects, you should remember that he started writing when the continent or Nigeria was more or less free. We look at Things Fall Apart in detail. Nevertheless, you need to understand that it was the first novel written by an African that put the literature from the continent immediately on the map of world literature. That is, it is one novel that received global recognition. We will deal with that in course of time. Let's have a quick mention regarding the other two novels in the trilogy also. No Longer at Ease. It is a sequel to Things Fall Apart. What do you mean by the term sequel? It's more or less a part 2 of Things Fall Apart. So, do you have any idea regarding the protagonist of this novel? See, while we discuss Things Fall Apart, we get to know Okongo, who is the protagonist of Things Fall Apart. So, we studied who a protagonist is, or what is the meaning of the term protagonist. A protagonist simply refers to the central character of a work of art. Remember? Yes. So, in Things Fall Apart, the protagonist is Okongo. So, in this work, No Longer at Ease, which is a sequel to Things Fall Apart, the protagonist is the grandson of Okongo, named Obi. So, this Obi is the grandson of Okongo. Obi is the protagonist of No Longer at Ease. Okongo is the protagonist of the novel that we will be studying today, Things Fall Apart. Okay, yes, a quick mention regarding Arrow of God also. It is Achebe's third novel of the series. Here he further explains the encounter theme at greater length. Alright, yes. It is located somewhere between Things Fall Apart and No Longer at Ease. It is a period when colonialism has become well established in Nigeria, that is portrayed in this novel. Speaking about the later novels by Chinua Achebe, they include A Man of the People and Hills of Savannah, among others. He too has written and published stories, some of which include Chike and the River, or is it Chick and the River, in the year 1966. Yes, good. So, I'll repeat what I just said. Achebe has written and published stories also, and some of these include works like Chick and the River, published in the year 1966, and Girls at War, published in the year 1973. And if you look at Girls at War, it portrays both the traditional and modern life of the then society. He has also written some poems, so in a way we can say he was also a poet. His collections include Beware Soul, Brother, published in the year 1971. It is a portrayal of the tragedy of the Biafran War. He has also written a book about the problems of Nigeria. It is titled The Trouble with Nigeria, published in the year 1984. Keep that in mind. We must have heard about some other notable African writers also, and they include people like Wole Soyinka. There is one famous poetry that is prescribed for studies in schools and colleges. I believe it is titled Telephone Conversation. I am not sure whether you have studied. That is a well-renowned poem by Wole Soyinka. It is the same Wole Soyinka mentioned here. So there is Thiongo, Senghor, and Nadine Gordimer. She is also Nadine Gordimer is also very famous. Gordimer usually talks of the limits imposed on a writer's creativity by the policy of apartheid, whereas Thiongo pleads for decolonizing the mind. That is one notable work by Thiongo. Then Senghor, speaks of the superiority of black Africans by asserting the concept of negritude. You must have heard of the term negritude. And yet another important thing to remember is that Achebe expressed his views about some of these significant matters in his book of essays called Morning Yet on Creation Day. Yes. So, your study material also provides you a brief summary of this particular work, Morning Yet on Creation Day. Now, let's move on to a quick overview of the novel Things Fall Apart, shall we? First and foremost, I will speak about the structure of this particular novel. It is divided into 3 parts and we have 25 chapters in this particular novel. Remember, it is published in the year 1958 and I also told you who the protagonist of this novel is. The protagonist is named Okongo. He is actually a resident of Umuofia. Umuofia is basically a cluster of villages. Alright? Yes. So within the time constraints, we won't be able to proceed with a very detailed chapter wise discussion. Nevertheless, I will help you with the basic plot line. That is, this novel is set in Umuofia. As I mentioned, it is a cluster of 9 villages on the lower Niger. Remember Niger, the river that we already mentioned. So this is a very powerful clan and these people are very much skilled in war and they are proud in their traditions, they are proud of their traditions and advanced social institutions as well. Our protagonist, that is Okongo, is a very hard-working person and he has become a great man among his society as well. So as per the social standards of those times, anyone who has got many titles and who has many wives would be renowned. So he has taken 3 wives and his barn is also full of yams and the staple crop of those tribes were yams, okay, Y-A-M-S. So he was the one who was very stubborn in nature, he was ill-tempered and he was very, strict with the household also. He rules his family with the iron fist. It is what is mentioned. So one day there takes place an incident in the society. A neighboring clan, that is another group of people, commits an offense against this particular clan Umuofia. So there would probably be a war, right, as a consequence? Yes. But to avoid war, there was a compensation to be made. That is, in order to compensate, the other clan should sacrifice 1 virgin girl and 1 young boy. So this girl is to become the offended party's new wife. So when you look at the novel in detail, you will understand what this is referring to. The boy who is sacrificed is named Ikimefuna and the plan is not to kill him immediately. Alright, hence he was taken away from his own family and as a consequence he lives in Umuofia for 3 years. So during this time he lived with our protagonist Okongo and his family. More or less Ikimefuna becomes part of Okongo's family. And remember, one of the sons of Okongo, Noi, is very much mentioned in details in this novel. Okongo's oldest son is Noi and he becomes close with this Ikimefuna and they more or less develop brotherly feelings for each other. And Okongo's eldest son also, that is Noi, treats Ikimefuna like a brother as I mentioned. But eventually the oracle calls for the boy's death. It is time to kill the boy and a group of men take away Ikimefuna in order to kill him. But it is tough for Okongo because he has more or less considered Ikimefuna as his own son and this boy had immense trust in Okongo as well. He was of the confidence that Okongo was walking along with him and that he will not be killed. But what happens is that Ikemefuna gets killed and Okongo even takes part in this killing. That is, even though he was so fond of the child, his devotion to the clan was that much intense. He fought, or rather he was so very stubborn in order to fulfill his responsibility as a member of the clan that he even killed the boy, or rather participated in the act of killing. But this became a shock for Noi, Okongo's son, who used to consider the murdered boy as if a brother. So Okongo is also shaken, but he continues with his drive to become a lord of his clan. To be very frank, his son always disappointed him. That is, Noi was a constant disappointment to Okongo, but he was greatly fond of his daughter, Esimna. Okay, that is, she is the child of his second wife, Ikwefi. Ikwefi also has a past, that is, she has given birth to 10 children, but only Esimna survived. Alright, and she also loves the girl very much. But one issue with this girl is that she is more or less sick mostly, and sometimes the mother fears that she too will die. I suppose it's better to leave the subplots. Maybe when you get time you can read. Material gives you a detailed analysis of all these things that I am describing. Okay, maybe you can have a look at it later. So later, at some point in time, there happened a funeral of one of the great men of the clan. Okay, so accidentally, see, during this funeral they do this gunshots also. So accidentally, as part of this gunshot, a boy gets killed by Okongo. So as per the law of the land, a person who murders one from his clan must be exiled for a period of 7 years. What do you mean by the term exile? This person has to move away to a distant land. Alright, yes. So as a consequence, Okongo has no choice but to go in exile. So he bears the exile bitterly. He moves to his mother's homeland. The name of the land is Empanto. He moves on to Empanto. There he is received by his mother's family. They treat him generously also. This family is headed by his maternal uncle. He is a wise old man. So during this exile, there happens a great transition in both Umofia and Mbando. In both these lands, the white men arrive, missionaries arrive first, and they start to preach a religion which was totally unfamiliar to the people of this tribe, and many of them get converted, but generally the converts are men of low ranks or outcasts for that matter. However, with time, this new religion, which is the new religion? Christianity is mentioned. Okay, so it gains momentum, and Okongo's child, that is Noi, his eldest son, becomes a convert for that matter. And this was very surprising for Okongo to know, and hence he beats the boy. And as a consequence, Noi leaves home. Okay. So when Okongo returns to Umofia after the exile, to his surprise, everything has changed. That is, this church has won some converts, some of whom are fanatical and disrespectful of clan customs. That is, when he was living there, all these men used to follow the customs of the clan. But now what happens with the interference of Christianity, or rather, it is mentioned that a new religion got into prominence, and as a result, even the people of the land became so very fanatical and disrespectful towards the clan. General custom was this, that is, the clan is no longer free to judge its own. A district commissioner judges cases in ignorance, and he is backed by armed power. Okay, armed forces were also employed. Later, there happens another incident, that is, during a religious gathering, a convert, by convert, a person who has changed to Christianity must be referred to. So, he or she, probably he, unmasks one of the clan spirits. So, this becomes obviously a grave offense, and in response, the clan decides that the church will no longer be allowed in Umuofia, and this resulted in more or less a conflict. They tear the building down. Which building? Church. Soon afterwards, the district commissioner asks the leaders of the clan, including Okongo, to come see him for a peaceful meeting. The leaders arrive and they are quickly arrested and taken to prison, and there they are humiliated and beaten, and they are held until the clan pays a heavy fine. After the release of the men, the clan calls a meeting. Okongo wants war. He is very furious. Later, he kills one of the court messenger. The other court messengers escape. To his surprise, not many of his fellow men supported him. So, he more or less tried to resist, whereas the others didn't support him, and he was very much in grief for the destruction of his people's independence. At the same time, he also feared of the humiliation of dying under white's lords, because he killed someone and he'll obviously be taken to the prison, right? As a result, do you know what he did? He hanged himself, that is, he committed suicide. So the ending is quite tragic, and that reminds me of the last novel that we studied. Remember which is the last novel that we studied in our previous lesson? There also we looked at a death scene towards the climax. We studied Kate Chopin's Awakening, remember? Yes, The Awakening by Kate Chopin. Okay, there also we saw a suicide to a greater extent. When you look at your textbook, you can see one unit about Chinua Achebe life and works, the other unit about the detailed explanation, which is basically what I just told you. Adu thaneyanu karyam. Adu kazhinju the next chapter is about specific features of things fall apart. So it's just these things that are mentioned. Remember, there is an introductory session also which I have left for you to read. Alright, so these are just the aspects mentioned in the textbook. Okay, nevertheless, for your easy understanding, I will also explain the characteristics of each and every character. Alright, so right now we will focus our attention towards the main characters of this particular novel. To be very frank, there is one main character in this particular novel, that is Okongo, the protagonist. All the rest of them do not have much prominence in the novel. Nevertheless, I will just introduce them to you. We already know them since I explained the summary. However, I will quickly introduce Okongo once again to you. Okongo, we know, is the protagonist of this work. About his characteristics, he is ambitious because he wants to become the leader of the clan, remember? He is ill-tempered, he is too angry, and we also studied how he beats up his wives. And it is said that it was quite normal during those times in that particular culture. And he was very proud. And we can say he is more or less the tragic hero of Things Fall Apart. Remember the last scene where he hangs himself? Yes. Okongo rules his family with an iron fist, which means that he is extremely strict. That is more or less because he is deeply dedicated to the traditions and social hierarchies of his people. Remember how he kills himself. That is, partly he did so that he will not be executed under the white man's laws. That is, he didn't want to get executed under the colonizers' rules and laws. So this shows his patriotic sentiments also. Remember that. Another character in this novel is Unoka. Unoka is basically Okongo's father. There is a comparison given in chapter 1 of this novel. That is, chapter 1 explains Okongo as a famous person primarily because of his physical appearance. At the age of 18, Okongo had defeated the strongest man named Amalinse in a wrestling contest. And now at present, when the novel takes place, or when the plot of the novel takes place, he is 38 years old. So this contrast between Okongo and Unoka is mentioned in chapter 1, where Unoka is mentioned as a weak man who is not so talented in managing his household. He is very lazy also, whereas his son Okongo is very active and smart with respect to household and management. Unoka was also a famous person, and his fame rested upon his musical qualities. I suppose he used to play some musical instruments. Yes. And unlike his son Okongo, Unoka was not physically strong also. He was a weak person. And he died when Okongo was very young. Alright. So the next main character is Ikemefuna. Who is Ikemefuna? The child who was brought into the family of Okongo. A young boy given to Umofia by a neighboring village. So he is more or less sacrificed to prevent a war, and he lives in Umofia along with Okongo's family for 3 years. And remember how he was later killed? Yes, we discussed all those aspects. Then there is Noi, who is Okongo's son. Remember, he is the eldest son from the first wife of Okongo. And one significant aspect to remember is that he later converts to Christianity. Then there is Noi's mother, and there is Esudu, who is the oldest man in Umofia, one of the oldest men we can say, and it is during his funeral that the gun explodes, which leads to Okongo's exile. There is Ikwifi, the second wife of Okongo, Esinma, the daughter of Okongo. There is this priestess of Agbala, or the oracle of the hills and the caves. Then Uchindu, who is the maternal uncle of Okongo. There are also a few minor characters which include the district commissioner, Mr. Smith, Mr. Brown, Mr. Kiaga. He is basically a Christian African. All the rest mentioned here are white men, I believe. Yes. So that's a quick overview of the main characters of this work. This work also emphasizes on various themes. So even if our study material doesn't focus on these themes, you can just have an idea so that you can make use of this as and when you Write the answers for your examination. Social disintegration, ambition, masculinity. You can write Okongo as example. You can compare and contrast him with his father. There is this tribal belief, justice. All these can be considered as some of the prominent themes in this novel. Is that clear? For your TEE, you will be asked to write about this novel. There will be some question based on this novel. Yes, firstly you should write an introduction regarding Chinua Achebe. Thereafter, in the second paragraph, you can write about the background of the novel, maybe some aspects from the very first unit. Later you can write about the publication, the protagonist and things like that. Later you can move on to your straight answer with respect to the question. And also towards the end of your answer, towards the last paragraph, add some critical insights also, and you can conclude the answer. So this is how you should write. And the last unit of this block is also very important because it deals with specific features of things fall apart. So moving on to the specific features of this particular novel by Chinua Achebe titled Things Fall Apart. So this is more or less a novel which describes the life of the Igbo society with prominence given to the protagonist Okongo. On the face of it, it is a very simple tale of the rise and fall of Okongo, the protagonist. Remember, he is very impatient and short-tempered. His insistence on participating in the killing of Ikemefuna. Remember, he has treated this young boy as his own son for a number of years. I think 3 years. This is an example. This instance is an example of Okongo's stubbornness. Okay. So there is this word given in the study material, obstinacy. Obstinacy refers to stubbornness, and in Malayalam we say pidivashi. Okay, that is the word meaning. And his impatience is also described through his attitude towards the physically weak people. It is because of this that Okongo had no patience with his own father too. A typical example of Okongo's short temper is evident in his beating his wives during certain events in life. You can read about it. At the surface level, the novel appears to have no complexity. That is, at the very first reading, we'll think as if there is no depth of character portrayal or plot construction. But actually, this novel is not very simple in nature. The quality of simplicity is quite deceptive for that matter. It is because it is the story of a whole clan, a whole society, Igbo society, on the eve of colonial takeover. So, more or less we can say that it is not the protagonist Okongo who has central importance in this novel. At the same time, it is the story, or it is the Igbo tribe, the society, that is the real hero of Things Fall Apart. This is because of the fact that Achebe has included a number of incidents which have no direct bearing as Okongo's character. But all these are very significant from the point of view of depicting the Igbo society at Umuofia. So more or less we can say that the Igbo society is the real hero of Achebe's Things Fall Apart. So simplicity and the layers associated with it, you need to focus your attention towards that aspect, that feature of this novel. Another important feature is universality. So our very author Achebe himself has stated in one of his essays called Novelist as Teacher. See, this is one essay included in the collection that we already discussed, Morning Yet on Creation Day. Remember that collection that we discussed while we were speaking of the other works of Chinua Achebe, right? Yes. So he mentions in this essay that one of the primary purpose of his novel is to educate his readers about the glory of their past, that is the pre-colonial life in Africa. This he does with the intention of correcting the distortions which were deliberately introduced. Who introduced these? The Europeans introduced such ideas into the history and culture of Africa. This was done in order to create an inferiority complex in the minds of Africa. Inferiority with respect to the Europeans. So they justified their colonization of Africa by stating that they had come to Africa to civilize them. So the frequent use of the expression white man's burden for black Africans show the same frame of mind of white man's superiority as well as his philanthropic spirit. White man's burden, what does that mean? That is, they used to say as if it is their burden, it is their responsibility to civilize the people of Africa. So we can say that Things Fall Apart is a text about a specific society, that is the Igbo people, with a specific aim. What is the aim? It intends to restore their self-confidence. Yet another important feature is man-woman relationships. So if you look at the text, you can find a lot of instances where Achebe portrays man-woman relationship in Igbo society primarily through Okongo and his wives. Remember, he has 3 wives. Yes. So it is said that he ruled his household with a heavy hand. His wives lived in fear of his temper. So he had an upper hand and he was very strict and he was ill-tempered. So that is how his relationship with his wives were. And he even shouts at Noi's mother, that is his first wife. He believed in the idea that as a member of the Igbo social organization, he should be able to rule his women and children. That was his idea. And as we mentioned many a time, he was very harsh towards women, especially his wives. He also shouted at his second wife, Ikwefi, and all such instances are given in your study material. The next important feature is folk material, which include proverbs, sayings and metaphors. So throughout his narration, he has included folk material. Remember, the Igbos were renowned for their extensive use of proverbs, sayings and metaphors. The art of conversation itself is described with the help of the following proverb in the textbook, that is, proverbs are the palm oil with which words are eaten. So Adichie builds this into his own narrative by weaving these folk elements into his own narrative. That is, the way he intermingles these folk elements into his narration is quite appreciable. Among the Igbo society members, proverbs are used to describe a person's interaction and relations with others, focusing especially on the individual's place in the society. Among them, for instance, they had a saying that if a child washed his hands, he could eat with kings. Listen carefully. If a child washed his hands, he could eat with kings. What does that mean? It means that one could raise one's social status by one's own behavior. So such proverbs and sayings are elaborated in your study material. You may have a look at them. Another important aspect is the use of language and sign. The language is very simple and direct. So is the syntax or sentence structure. He incorporates a large number of Igbo words into his English language structures. One interesting aspect is that even though these words are foreign to us, we more or less will be able to guess the meanings of these words. Maybe it's because of his narration, or is it because we more or less understand that some of these words have musical qualities related to music, because such known words will also be used in between. Alright? Yes. Achebe's portrayal of the Igbo society is very much in detail that he uses proverbs in day-to-day life among his writing as well. So, the use of Igbo proverbs in this particular work is also something that has to be noted. He portrays the Igbo society in which not only is the use of proverbs in day-to-day life quite popular, but it is highly prized as well. Yes, proverbs lend an element of precision to Achebe's style of writing. Very often it is not easy to intermingle all these things. Remember, he has used folk materials in his writings, so is the language made very simple, even if he has incorporated some foreign words. By foreign words, I am referring to the words from the Igbo society. Likewise, he has also incorporated proverbs, sayings and others into his writings. So, in short, we can summarize that, or rather we can conclude that Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart has become a favorite book with readers, critics and also translators all over the world. It is sometimes suggested that the book is a very simplistic account of the life of a character, but on a deeper reading we understand that this is not that a simple or not so complex novel. It is indeed a novel with layers, and it depicts the Igbo society in general. Hence we can say that the Igbos towards the end of 19th century is the real subject of the novel. So that's all regarding Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. So in this particular session we discussed the life and work of Chinua Achebe. Thereafter we moved on to a detailed summary of the novel. We looked at the important characters, we spoke of the major themes in the novel, and finally we had a detailed look at the specific features of Things Fall Apart. Focus is given to aspects such as simplicity, universality, man-woman relationships, folk material, language and style. So that's all with respect to Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. For your TEE, there will be a short essay question. There will also be short questions. Nevertheless, focus should be given to the essay question, because an essay question will carry higher marks, right? Yes. So I also told you how to structure your answer with respect to this particular essay. You can include points from all the units. You should have a proper introduction and a proper conclusion. Meanwhile, the middle paragraphs should answer the question to the point. You need to write your answers elaborately. Remember, you shouldn't spend too much pages for one answer. It depends on the question. That is, you won't be provided additional booklet. It would be advisable to organize your answers in such a way that all those answers carrying equal marks should be of equal length preferably. Okay, that would showcase your organization skills. For that matter, you need to be equipped, you need to be prepared enough, right? So, you need to read your study material. If you have time, you can make your own notes. You may refer to the previous question papers. I will also deal with a session on the previous question paper analysis if possible shortly. Yeah. That's all for today. We will meet again next day. In our next class, we will discuss Gopinath Mohanty's Paraja. Thank you for joining me today.